So here's the part that gets skipped. Because it exposes the lie at the center of modern reverse victimhood narratives. White Americans overwhelmingly resist acknowledging that they still benefit from racism and nepotism. Because it is embedded into the system, having been socialized to mistake inherited access for hard work. In a nation built on stolen indigenous land, per codified by Johnson versus Mintosh of 1823. Then it was financed by enslaved African labor, per the U.S. Constitution's Three-Fifths Clause and the Fugitive Slave Acts of 1793 and 1850. And then it was expanded through the extraction of an entire continent via colonial capitalism. Yet absolutionists claim simply because they personally didn't use racial slurs or participate in lynch mobs, as if silence erases structure. That self-deception is protected by policy. New Deal exclusions that bar black workers from wealth building jobs, FHA redlining maps in the 1930s that created white generational wealth, GI Bill discrimination, the violent rollback of black political power. Per the Wilmington Coup of 1898 and the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, and many more events. And modern advantages like legacy admissions, network hiring, and zoning laws, while the war on drugs and the 1994 crime bill locked in racialized punishment that preserved economic gaps. So when those who still dominate 98% of the presidency and Senate, 94% of the SCOTUS, 91% of the House, and 90% of the top CEO roles, despite white men only being 30% of the population. So when they claim persecution or say stupid ass shit like JD Vance just said, you no longer have to apologize for being white. When accountability is discussed, it's not comedy. It's not no fucking game. It's not no fucking joke. It's dangerous denial because there were no trials for slavery or colonialism, no proportional reparations, no land restitution at scale, and the benefits of past racism continue to compound into the present. So why wouldn't you, if you're a good person, why wouldn't you apologize for something that you still benefit from to this day? Why not? So since I'm from Chicago and Cleveland, let's talk about how discrimination against black people here is baked into multiple systems at once, including policing, education, labor, healthcare, transportation, environmental policy, and political power, not just housing. Through laws, and practices like racially biased policing under stop and frisk style patrols, gang databases that disproportionately label black youth, harsher sentencing outcomes tied to the war on drugs, and school discipline policies that suspend and expel black students at several times the rate of white students. I was a victim of that. Feeding a documented school to prison pipeline reinforced by Illinois and Ohio juvenile justice practices. Right? Now, in Chicago, policies like public school mass closures under mayoral control and union exclusions historically tied to race and transit neglect on the south and west sides and lead poisoned water and industrial pollution concentrated in black neighborhoods and weak enforcement of civil rights protections under laws like the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and Voting Rights Act have continued to strip black communities of teachers, jobs, healthcare access, clean environments, and political leverage. While Cleveland shows the same pattern through the legacy of labor union exclusion, police violence complaints, healthcare deserts, welfare restrictions, and post-riot disinvestment. Following events like the 1966 Huff Uprising, all of which locked generations into economic and health inequality. These systems still operate today through zoning decisions, school funding formulas tied to property wealth, unequal infrastructure spending. Then we have voter dilution, discriminatory lending and hiring data, and racialized enforcement, which is exactly why we need more black Americans born and raised here in America in political power, not no motherfucking Somalians and not no motherfucking Arabs. And damn sure not no motherfucking Haitian, because they keep trying to lie to niggas and tell them that that nigga that founded Chicago was Haitian. Nah. Not symbolic black faces, but leaders with lived experience who understand how these interconnected laws and policies actually harm everyday black people and can dismantle them at the root instead of managing the damage. You understand? Yes, I support ICE. And let me tell you why I support ICE and why I want all of the fucking illegals out of my goddamn country. Let's get into it. So, I argue that black Americans are uniquely positioned to critique and even strategically support immigration enforcement because the modern immigration system was expanded only after black people forced the U.S. to abandon explicitly racist laws. And that expansion was then used not to uplift black communities, but dilute their bargaining power, political leverage, and access to jobs and resources they had just fought to legally claim. ICE's modern expansion reflects a backlash to black-led civil rights victories that dismantled explicitly racist immigration and labor regimes because once black Americans forced legal recognition of equal rights, elites widened immigration pathways not out of solidarity, but to construct a cheaper, more controllable labor force. And you don't have to educate black people if you can just pay a motherfucking immigrant pennies on a dollar. Whose vulnerability to deportation suppresses wages, fractures worker solidarity, and redirects white economic anxiety away from capital, while the original theft of black labor, land, and political power remains unresolved. And some of the immigrants will come here and classify themselves as white, whether they're Mexican, whether they're European, they're some from the Middle East. All of that goes into the white category and makes white people look even better. The U.S. economy is structurally dependent on immigrant labor by design. With agriculture, construction, meatpacking, logistics, hospitality, healthcare, and domestic work relying on workers kept precarious and underpaid. So even a short-term absence of that labor would expose how growth has been propped up by inequality rather than efficiency. Forcing higher wages, better conditions, and policy concessions that are delayed because deportability functions as an invisible strikebreaker. The broader reality in this framing is that immigration enforcement is less about fairness or legality than about maintaining a racialized class ladder in which immigrants are positioned as disposable labor, and black Americans are kept from full parity, allowing elites to stabilize hierarchy by pitting groups against each other, while avoiding true redistribution and equal access to power, capital, and protection under the law. So, attention all immigrants, you know the real way to get white people to do what you want? Leave. Black people will continue to fight for you, just like we've always done. So, let's discuss the Ethiopian Bible and how Africa is the Mecca of all religions, right? Even acknowledging that the Ethiopian Bible may not be the single oldest physical Bible, Africa has been so thoroughly whitewashed, erased, looted, and extracted that the absence of surviving evidence itself becomes evidence of deeper loss. From the repeated burnings and sackings of the Library of Alexandria to the Diocletianic persecutions from 303 to 311 CE. Which explicitly ordered Christian scriptures destroyed across Africa, to later Islamic Crusader and European colonial insertions that removed manuscripts, artifacts, and oral records into European archives or erased them entirely. But what survives shows a pattern. African Christianity predates European Christianity. African theologians shaped doctrine. And yet, canon law decisions made at European-backed councils like Hippo 393 and Carthage 397 see Africa's intellectual labor preserved while African-authored or Africa-preserved texts were excluded, rewritten, or reinterpreted through Roman authority. Mirroring broader historical patterns where African achievements such as Abu Bakr II's Atlantic voyage tradition are dismissed, not because they're disproven, but because colonial standards of proof demand what colonialism itself destroyed. Basically, in order for colonial standards of proof to exist, they have to automatically dismiss anything else. You know, I thought it was very, very, very ironic that the two places the Bible is often claimed to originate from, Rome and Greece, are the very two places responsible for the whitewashing around the world. Canon control and erasure of African Christianity. Taken together, systemic manuscript destruction laws, forced canonization events, and calendar manipulation, removal of African imagery and theology, and the physical extraction of knowledge during empire. There is strong historical proof for the conclusion that the earliest African Christian texts were likely burned, stolen, or rewritten, and that any surviving proof is not the full story, but a fragment, with every fragment pointing to a much larger, deliberately obscured African origin of global Christianity and all other religions. So since I'm starting to see black men act like they don't know why black women wear weave, I'm going to tell you why. Because I feel like it's okay to be stupid if you're like 16 and under. But once you become an adult, you have to inform yourself. The information is not going to find you. Because schooling, education is not education. It's indoctrination. You understand? Now let's get into this. Starting with the Tenon laws in Louisiana 1786, which legally forced black women, free and enslaved, to cover their hair with tignon, because their natural hair adornments and styles were deemed too attractive. AKA, white men couldn't keep their hands off of black women, so it made white women jealous to the point where they made a law about it. A threat to white social order and racial hierarchy, turning black hair into something that had to be hidden to signal inferiority, while still allowing white men access to black women without challenging white femininity or status. After slavery, this control didn't disappear, it evolved. During Jim Crow, black hair was labeled unkempt, unprofessional, or dirty, leading to school rules, job discrimination, beauty standards in media, and early 20th century policies that punished afros, braids, locks, and head wraps, while rewarding straightened hair as a marker of respectability, intelligence, and employability, even within black institutions trying to survive in a hostile economy. This pressure wasn't only about appealing to white people, but about survival in a system where proximity to Eurocentric beauty standards equaled safety, opportunity, and social mobility. Oh, and I'm still not even done yet. This is why chemical straighteners, hot combs, wigs, and later weaves became normalized. Not as self-hatred, but as adaptation under coercion. And then as of recent, we have the Crown Act, which exists precisely because those older laws and norms never fully died and still aren't dying, proving that black hair was criminalized first, stigmatized second, and only recently acknowledged as something that never needed fixing in the first place. You understand? Go. Okay, don't forgive or don't forget, bitch, I'ma hold a grudge.